Hi, I'm the Space Quest historian, and thank you so very much for getting the channel to 2,400 subscribers. 2,402, in fact, 2,402 people. I'm a little shocked, to be perfectly honest, but thank you, pleasantly shocked is what I should say, really. I'm not entirely sure how we got there, but thank you very much. Now, it's been a bit of a bumpy ride going up to 2,400 because, as you can see, the whole subscriber thing has been a bit up and down. I've got to 2,400, then it dipped back down below, then it got up there again and dipped down. I don't know what the hell is going on. So whoever keeps subscribing and then unsubscribing, thanks for making my life interesting, I guess. But anyway, as promised, when I hit 2,400 subs, I was going to do another one of these little Q&A things. Now, it's kind of silly doing Q&A things because I do have the Space Quest Historian Discord, where everyone can go on. It's open, it's public. Everyone can go on and ask a question, get it answered. I'm on there every day. At least I try to be on every day, at least for just a little bit. And we've got a pretty open and active community of like-minded people, so fun times indeed. However, you know, Q&As are fun, I guess. I've always wanted to do them, and thankfully some people did ask some questions, and I'm gonna go through them. Now, first we have a couple of questions from Twitter, and it's from Frey Joker, or Space Cody, whatever your name wants to be. How would you break down adventure games into subgenres? Which subgenres do you think persist more meaningfully than others in this modern era? That is a very complicated question. Thank you so much for asking that. I'm gonna have a bit of a think about this, because one thing that Frederick in particular over on Backseat Designers, the podcast that I co-host, one thing he's particularly fond of doing is poking me whenever I get a little snobbish and a little purist kind of person, because I used to be, well, very snobbish and very purist about it. I thought an adventure game is one where you control a character and you pick up shit and then you talk to people and you shove shit in their faces and you get them to sort of do your evil bidding to advance the plot. It's kind of a larceny and manipulation type affair. That, to me, is a proper adventure game. You know, your space quests, your monkey islands, that sort of thing. He has, however, since broadened my horizons a bit. So, for instance, he was a very big proponent of the fact that Amnesia: The Dark Descent qualified as an adventure game in his mind, and I have had to concede that yes, although it does have sneak sections and all, I haven't actually played it, but the way he described it, it's very much an adventure game. And you could even argue that The Seventh Guest, to some extent, is an adventure game. Myst certainly is ostensibly an adventure game. And now you have games that are sort of adventure game-ish, or they have elements of adventure games in them, but they're kind of a hybrid thing. We have modern adventure games, which are of, you know, the Wadget Eye caliber, where it's still very much a point-and-click affair, but it's been streamlined a lot. There are less obtuse inventory puzzles and more of a, you know, just follow the story, interrogate people, and all of this stuff. We even have the walking simulators now, of which I am very fond indeed. The Beginner's Guide, the Stanley Parable, Gone Home is my absolute favorite of the bunch. Love it to bits. Although they don't contain much in the way of puzzle solving, they're still of, you know, the narrative drive variety, which I dearly love, because above everything else, I think what adventure games do really well is they tell a good story. Or they tell a funny story. I mean, Monkey Island is not known for its deep and engrossing plot lines, although they certainly do have plot lines, but, you know, Day of the Tentacle didn't necessarily have a deep and engrossing plot line, but it was funny. That game was perfect for the type of story that it wanted to tell. So anything that does have a deep and engrossing story and a narrative drive and not much in terms of twitch reflexes and such, I think that would be my definition of an adventure game, but again, it's a broad question, and I think I'm just digging myself a deeper grave talking about this. So, I love adventure games of all kinds. Some I love sort of by proxy. That would be missed. I actually don't love that. Digging. Why can't I stop digging? Maybe I'm being greedy here asking another question. Don't you worry about it. Someone beat you to the greedy punch. We'll get to that in a second. Anyway, it is Pride Month, he said, in June. And it's technically still June. It's June 19th when I'm recording this. It is Pride Month. What LGBTIQ plus heroes, gotta get them all in there, and I really had to concentrate to get that right. Do you recognize in adventure games? Did they change how you understood issues of gender and sexuality? Wow, that went into the deep end fast, didn't it? Let's see. Well, the thing is, I don't recall there being much in the way of, like, really staunch gay or certainly not transgender heroes in adventure games. They're usually bit players or side characters and such, and well, I think that's really kind of a shame, because one thing I think adventure games have done really well, not to pat ourselves too much on the back, but one thing adventure games have embraced that you could argue some other genres are kind of still catching up to, is having very strong female presences. There are a lot of adventure games with female protagonists, and not just in the sort of token, I'm a female, look at me with my female woes kind of thing, which often is sort of a crutch that some storytellers tend to div in. I really had to think about that one. Not trying to point any fingers, but one thing we're good at is male to female inclusivity. And I would love to see that, branch out even more and have, transgender protagonists, have gay protagonists, have bisexual, everything. We have had some amazing gay and transgender and bisexual bit players. We have, what's his name, Trevor? Trevor in Phantasmagoria 2? I mean, say what you want about the game, but he is, Curtis's best friend, and he's not stereotypically effeminate gay type of thing, and this is a game made in the 90s, so you have to remember that was kind of a broad stereotype back then. Phantasmagoria 2 skirted right along around that and actually presented him as a human being. Dear God. We have Von Glauer in Gabriel Knight 2, who is, well, a bisexual character. Jane Jensen has gone on record saying that, and he is presented in a very enigmatic and mysterious way, but it's also not played up for any shock value or any, in a tawdry way. It's part of his character. And those are good examples. I quite like that. And certainly, not necessarily from playing games, but from just being on social media and, growing up. You had to do that at some point, right? I have become a lot more sensitive to issues of gender and sexuality and alternative sexualities and all of that stuff. It helps that a couple of really good friends of mine that I've met via the adventure game community happen to be transgender, happen to be gay, and all of that stuff. So actually, getting out, talking to people who aren't necessarily yourself is the first step towards that. And again, I would love to see the stories that we tell in games start to become more inclusive. Not in a token way, but just in a sense of, they have a voice too, they have stories to tell too, we should tell them. And then a wild Dan appeared. See, Dan is one of my staunch Patreon supporters. And when he got wind that I was doing this Q&A, actually I think he might have suggested it, he just suddenly decided to ask me every question known to man. I think he got up to about 23, maybe 28 questions. So I am gonna, other of my Patreon supporters kind of got a couple of questions in edgewise there, but I'm just gonna run through them because, someone had to ask questions and Dan certainly did. So here we go. What's your earliest gaming memory? I think I've talked about this on a couple of podcasts. My earliest gaming memory is probably when my dad brought home a Commodore 64, my brother and I would sit there and play track and field and a bunch of, pirated games, because basically for the Commodore 64, at least in Europe, you didn't buy many games. You went over to your friend's house, he had a floppy drive, you had a floppy drive, and you would sit there and copy discs. It's what we did. I'm sorry. So anyway, those early gaming memories are with the Commodore 64. Actually, I sort of tell a lie, but that was my first real gaming memory, on an actual computer. But before that, my dad actually built, because he's an electrical engineer, he built a tiny little computer that could play Wheel of Fortune. It was just a little keypad with a little LCD sort of screen on the top, like a little scrolly screen. It had half of the alphabet on the keypad, and it could play a sort of Wheel of Fortune style game. And you have to remember, this was back in the 80s, so it was basically just a circuit board with a keypad on it and a little LCD screen. That was technically my first gaming memory. I have no idea how he did that, or how he, created that thing. But anyway, later he brought home the Commodore 64, and boom, we are off and running. Now, what is your strongest gaming memory? Well, I think it's a toss-up between two. The first one I've told many times. It was when I was maybe 8 years old. My parents went to some sort of dinner party, and they had to put the kid somewhere, the kid being me. So they stuck me down in front of this, must have been a 286, or maybe even an 8086, I don't remember, but it had Space Quest 2 on it, so they just sort of booted that game up and just let the kid sit there and play. We'll go have some wine and do adult things. So I spent the entire evening just walking around the outside of Xenon Orbital Station 4, not really realizing that I could walk up the walls and walk over to that little thing and turn around and go into the airlock. Never figured that out. Just spent hours and hours walking around outside. And I was having the time of my life. And the game was really gorgeous. I mean, for the time, I was used to the Commodore 64, so looking at that thing was like, whoa, Jesus Christ. My God. The other one was when I got the Space Quest Collection CD-ROM for the first time, and this must have been 1994. When I ordered it through the mail, I must have saved up some allowance or something, and then I pretended I was sick, so I wouldn't have to go to school, so I could sit home and play Space Quest 4, the CD-ROM version, for the first time. I remember my mom opening up the door to my room, and there's me playing Space Quest 4, having the time of my life, and she's going, "Are you absolutely sure you're sick?" "Oh, very sick, very, oh, terrible, near death's door. Excuse, you don't want to be in here, fumes and everything, you'll get sick. No, leave me be, please." And back to the game. What's the deal with you and King's Quest anyway? I even got the impression that you like Legend of Kyrandia, which is not that dissimilar to King's Quest. Again, I think I've answered this in previous Q&A videos as well. I don't necessarily hate King's Quest or Legend of Kyrandia. I just have a problem with fantasy. The whole swords and sorcerers and magic and chivalry and all of that. I'm bored to tears with it. Never watched the Lord of the Rings movie. Never read any of the Lord of the Rings. Never played Dungeons and Dragons for more than 5 minutes and getting bored with it. It's just not my thing. And yes, I liked Legend of Kyrandia 2, The Hand of Fate, because it was so quirky and weird, and it didn't have that much to do with running around with a sword and being all, "I'm going to save the kingdom," and all of that shit. I guess, to be perfectly honest, it's not that I hate King's Quest, I just hate fantasy stuff, alright? What are your favorite game music and themes, and any examples? Glad you asked that. Well, the obvious question would of course be Space Quest, and 3 and 4 have the best soundtracks in my book. The soundtrack by Bob Siebenberg for Space Quest 3 is awesome, and that was, when I played that the first time, all I had was a Sound Blaster, and it sounded awesome. And now hearing it on an MT32, which I didn't even know existed when I first heard it, it was just mind-blowing. And Space Quest 4 similarly has some of the best music you'll ever hear in any video game. And I'm very, very lucky to actually have gotten the opportunity to talk to the two gentlemen who put that soundtrack together. Ken Allen is actually a good friend of mine now, and I was just over the moon when he, wrote me and we started talking together, and he actually came to visit one time, and he crashed on my couch, and we had scotch, and he was telling me all these stories about how he composed the music for a number of Sierra games, and Space Quest 4 in particular. Amazing time. Beyond those, my favorite game soundtrack of all time is a bit of a weird one, because it's from a game that I am terrible at, that I've never finished, can't even get past the first level, in fact. I'm so awful at this game, but the soundtrack is so fucking amazing. It is The Last Ninja 2. For the Commodore 64, composed by Matt Gray. System 3, I believe the company was that published that thing. It's one of those isometric beat-em-up slash stealthy slash... You're a ninja. It's an 80s game. Of course you're a ninja. But the soundtrack is just... I've never heard the SID chip in the Commodore 64 rock out so hard that it does in The Last Ninja 2. And recently, Matt Gray sort of surfaced and ran a Kickstarter campaign to fund some re-recordings he was doing of all of the SID music that he's done for games over the years. It's quite a lot. His most famous one is The Last Ninja 2, and part of that Kickstarter campaign, if you pledged high enough, you got the entire soundtrack re-recorded with modern instruments, and I've been listening to that ever since it came out, and it is so brilliant. So brilliant, in fact. Fun little side note, Matt Gray, after he, stopped making video game soundtracks, he became part of a music production group. One of those music production groups that get in, a pop star has to finish an album, so they bring in this production group to finish, or to, essentially compose the songs for them and produce them and all that shit. He was one of 4 people who were actually responsible for Cher's Believe, the auto-tune song. So that's fun. Oh wait, another game soundtrack that I really, really enjoy is Rise of the Triad by Lee Jackson. It is phenomenal. I love it. It's so whimsical and funny and fast-paced and ridiculous, much like the game itself. And it really does rock out a lot. And it's got some slow moments. It's got some, beefy moments. I was very much into synth rock when I played Rise of the Triad for the first time, so it just ticked all the boxes. Amazing soundtrack. What do you consider to be hidden gems or underappreciated old adventure titles? Ooh, that's a good one. I usually just say Beneath the Steel Sky because I know it's a very popular game. At least if you're an old fart like me, it was a pretty big deal in 1994. I remember a lot of people played it back then, but it's sort of, slipped under the radar because then they went off and made this other game called Broken Sword something, just a complete waffle, really. But Beneath the Steel Sky is, I'm just kidding. Beneath the Steel Sky is an amazing game. It is my favorite, I say it's my favorite game, and Space Quest is my favorite series. So Beneath the Steel Sky, absolutely brilliant. I've played a bunch of adventure games that, I like for various reasons that may not gel with, popular opinion, and I can certainly see why it's a flawed opinion. I mean, I quite liked Harvester when it came out, and that game is, let's face it, it is shit. It's it's not a good game. It's a curiosity, but it's not. It didn't win any awards for very obvious reasons. Other games I quite liked, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is, again, it's not a very good game, but the setting and there's a very, very good game trying to get out from behind a mountain of bad decisions and shitty, coding and hardware and all of that. Graphics are terrible and all that. So I quite like those games, even though I know they're actually not very good. One game I think kind of flew under the radar and didn't deserve to, and it's gotten a bit more of a resurgence since then, but Toonstruck is actually a very, very good game. And the rights to Toonstruck have actually are being finagled at the time of recording. The thing is that when they made Toonstruck, they actually had enough material to essentially make a sequel right after. They had so much stuff. The reason why Toonstruck is a bit weird near the end is because they actually had to cut out, like say you've got the game right here. They cut out right down the middle and just released the first part of it. And the second part, they had most of the material ready. Not entirely sure how much of it, but if you ask the man who currently is finagling the rights, I forget his name, sorry, he says there is enough material there to just, make a sequel out of, and he's trying to get that off the ground, so to speak. So I'm really interested, because apparently that means there's a lot more stuff with Christopher Lloyd and Dan Castellaneta and all the weird, zany characters in that game just lying around that hasn't been seen for millions of years. So, interested to see where that goes. What's your gaming snacks and or beverage of choice? Well, I don't like snacking when I play games for some reason. I mean, bag of chips wouldn't kill me, but I like drinking cheap supermarket cola, basically. But if I'm playing a game, I get very sensitive about smears on my fingers. One of those weird little quirks, So if I've been eating chips and, you've got the chip residue on your fingers, I don't like to touch my keyboard or my mouse because I have this weird sense that I'm just sort of smearing filth and dirt all over it. So if I'm playing a game and it's a single hand game only, like you only use the mouse, then of course you can use your left hand to have some chips in the background. But honestly, I just, have some water or have some Coke and then I'm good. If you could make any game happen with any developers, which game would be produced? Space Quest 7. And it would be the two guys from Andromeda. It would be Mark Crow and Scott Murphy. And it would be fully licensed Space Quest, Roger Wilco. At least they'd be able to give him a proper send-off and off into space he shoots. They would never have to do another game after that. If they just did Space Quest 7, put that thing right in its coffin where it belongs and shot it off into space, I would be happy. Now we are getting the Space Venture, obviously, which is coming out. Not kidding, it is. And it is a spiritual sequel to Space Quest. I think it's even set in the same universe, or like a parallel universe. I don't know. And it's as close as we're gonna get. But I mean, Activision's got the rights to Space Quest, just sitting tight on it, and they're not letting it go, even for the two people who actually made the thing a success in the first place. So, it'll probably never happen, but Space Quest 7. The second game I'd actually really like to see is a Red Dwarf point-and-click adventure game, because there are a lot of adventure game references in the original series of Red Dwarf. Not the new ones. The new ones are shit, but seasons like 1 through 5, there are a bunch of adventure game references in Red Dwarf, and I would love it if the original creators, again, Doug Naylor and Rob Grant, they would both have to be involved, if they went in and actually made a point-and-click adventure game about Red Dwarf, with the cast and all of that shit, because there is so much. You could make a brilliant adventure game about Red Dwarf. It's a shame that, and I know there's a text adventure fan-made, and there is a point-and-click graphic adventure game that I could never get running, also fan-made, but, I want a real one. I want one with high production values. I want one with the original cast doing the voices and all of this shit. I want a proper Red Dwarf adventure game. Being Danish, what are the best Danish bands? Probably Leben, right? Aqua? No, none of those. Good Danish bands. Well, most Danish bands are terrible. We are a very terrible nation when it comes to producing good music. There are two bands that I am really fond of. The first one sadly no longer exists. It was a Danish sludge hardcore band called the Psych Project, and they put on the most amazing live shows ever. I even at one point, because the drummer went to the same university as me, so at one point I just stumbled into him randomly. Actually, I think we were in class somewhere and I was scrolling through my iPod. I had an iPod at the time, those little, the little things with the wheels. It's not a smartphone. All it can do is play music. I was scrolling through the band list there, and this dude was looking over my shoulder and he's going, "Hey, that's my band." So he was looking at me, looking at Psych Project songs, and we started talking, and eventually he actually ended up playing drums on one of my songs, and I completely destroyed the mix. I mic'd up the drum kit completely wrong, and it sounds atrocious, but the drummer from the side project, played on one of my songs. The other Danish band that I really like is a recent industrial metal band called The Interbeing, who does, I won't say standard, but it's very 90s-ish industrial metal, think Fear Factory, that sort of stuff. But they're really, really good, and they're very sci-fi oriented, and, it's all about, cyborgs and awful things happening, so I love it. Are there any games you wanted to like but never really could get into? Oh, there are tons. There are tons. Gabriel Knight 3. Really, really wanted to get through that, because I hear the story is actually very, very good. The game is very, very terrible. I've tried playing it 100 times. I even have the box on my shelf behind me. I can never, every time I boot it up, I piss around that, village at the start and just don't really get anywhere, and before long the game is just pissing me off so much that I just can't bear it anymore, so I just put it away and lose interest. Are you a Monkey Island fan? Any Let's Plays possible for the future? Yes, and yes. Out of the 6 space quests, which is your least favorite and why? I think, wasn't that kind of obvious when I played the series? I think, and with all due respect and love to Josh Mandel, it is probably number 6. It is a good game, I like it, but there's just, that thing just came out sideways. Really. It could have been a tremendously good game, but it had so much trouble behind the scenes that what actually came out is sadly a very neutered and very weirdly put together game. There are some brilliant moments in it, don't get me wrong, but if I have to choose one of my children to kill, it's gonna be the 6th one. Sorry, Josh, I love you. Seeing you being the Space Quest historian, it would be reasonable to assume that in the age-old fight, you would side with Sierra over LucasArts, but is that the case in general? No. The whole Sierra versus LucasArts thing never really bothered with it, really. I think I've actually played more LucasArts games than I have played Sierra games, and I know for a fact that Sierra and LucasArts, during the height of their so-called battle for dominance over the adventure game market or whatever, used to meet regularly at Skywalker Ranch and play softball games. So, they were competitors on paper, and certainly there are stories of Ron Gilbert being green with envy that King's Quest was outselling Monkey Island games and all of that stuff. But as far as the rivalry, for my money at least, even back in the 90s, I was not a Sierra over LucasArts kind of guy. In fact, the first game I owned on CD-ROM was Day of the Tentacle, and I love that game to bits. And LucasArts consistently put out amazing, just classic after classic. So, nope, not siding with anyone there. What's your favorite so bad it's good game? Off the top of my head, I have no mouth and I must scream. It's so riffable, yet it's so sinister, and it really takes itself seriously, and it does have a very compelling, serious story that's just presented in the most Mystery Science Theater 3000D kind of way. So, off the top of my head, that's one. So, you're tall. Is it hard to shop for pants that fit? Yes. If you could erase a game from ever having existed, which would it be and why? I don't think I would. Even if a terrible game comes out, you have to learn from mistakes, and even learn from others' mistakes. So if a terrible game does come out and it's just awful and weird and even maybe offensive, you shouldn't bury history. You should learn from it. So we can point to any number of games that are deeply wrong on every level, but if we erase them from history, then we won't learn from the mistakes that they made. Haha, didn't expect me to get all philosophical on you there, did you? Okay, question number 16. In Space Quest 4, Roger visits Space Quest 10, Latex Base of Vestros, and Space Quest 12, Vohal's Revenge 2. Was there any thought about that from Crow and Murphy that the game series would ever actually get there? No. They purposely did that as a joke, really. having Space Quest 10, Latex Babes of Estros, which is a lazy rip-off of an old Infocom title, and Space Quest 12, and then they just start making sequels of sequels of sequels kind of thing. It's a joke. They honestly did not think there would be a game after Space Quest 4. It was going to be their magnum opus, and it was going to be the last one that they did. So, and you know, they famously said that they were getting very burned out with making Space Quest games, so Space Quest 4 has a really dark tone to it, and it was going to be their last middle finger to everything, and boom, that was going to be it. So no, they absolutely did not ever think that the series would get that far, and it didn't. But hey, what does your wife think about your YouTubing gaming antics? Does she like it, put up with it, hate it? Because I'm imagining 5 videos a week takes up quite some free time. Yes, it does. And I actually do have to scale down a bit. Not because of my wife. My wife is very understanding about this, and she doesn't really, you know, she doesn't watch any of my videos, and she doesn't really seem very interested in what I'm doing. But I do have to scale down my output quite a bit, because I'm currently only part-time employed, so I have to concentrate more on actually getting a full-time job. So what's going to happen in the future is we're only going to have one edited Let's Play a week. That's going to be the Space Quest games on Tuesday, and one live stream a week, which is going to be the Sunday live stream. It's not going to happen right away. There is going to be a gradual sort of dying down of it. There's a new co-commentary series starting on Thursday of Mudlarks, and that's a very, very long one, so you should be entertained for at least a couple of months ahead of now, you know, for Thursdays. And I've just started a new game on the Tuesday midnight streams, or 11 p.m. streams now, actually. So we're going to finish up that one, but then those will be the last ones. And sadly, the Friday videos are also going out. So those one-off videos, I might still do a couple, you know, just whenever there's time. But really, I have to, you know, start focusing and prioritize. What's with the penguins on top of your bookcase? They're penguins. I like penguins. Ah, so, a new player has entered the arena. When to expect capybaras on the shelves? I actually found a plush capybara on, I think it was Amazon, and I really want to get it, but, you know, maybe in the future. Maybe in the future you'll see a capybara on there. If you don't know what the hell this is all about, the whole capybara thing, go watch the Stanley Parable streams. It turned into a whole thing over on the SQH Discord. Don't ask. Ah, the Innuendo Bunny. G-Crusher has question number 20. Favorite outfit you've ever worn, like costumes or garb for wedding, that kind of thing. I don't know if you've noticed, but dress sense is not really one of my strong suits. Haha, pun. Unintentional. I don't really... I don't go to, like, Halloween dressed up as anything. I don't do costumes. I don't cosplay. I'm okay with people who do, honestly. But it's just not really my thing. I mean, there was that dress I wore when I was playing in my university band. That thing was comfortable as all hell. What's with this old Torben Frost thing? Is that like an artist name? Actually, no, not really. It's something that my friends in high school started calling me, and it's kind of stuck around ever since. The story behind it is not very interesting, but it ended up sort of becoming my online handle for a long period of time. And yeah, that's really it. It's just a nickname that my friends gave me back in high school and sort of stuck around for a really long time. To the point where if someone yells out Torben, I will actually go, hmm? Ah, is SQH Reviews shelved indefinitely, or might it return someday? I like in-depth reviews. So do I. I really, really do like them. I don't think I was very good at it. I did two. I did Inherit the Earth and Day of the Tentacle. And they took an awful long time to make, much more than I really thought was appropriate. And you know, it's a whole thing of you have to write the script first, and you have to play the game, get all the footage, and then edit the whole thing together. And it takes, you know, Let's Plays are much quicker, to be perfectly honest. You sit down, you record the game, then you load it up, and you edit it, and you just basically cut out all the silent bits, you know, where there's no commentary. That's my Let's Play. So I can get a good Let's Play video out in the span of 2 to 3 hours. Like 1 hour for recording, and then an hour and a half to 2 hours of editing. And boom, you're done. Whereas the whole review thing took, I don't know, maybe a week or more for every video. So, not prepared to spend that kind of time on it. I was teasing maybe bringing it back when I got Dockernaut into, or actually when he offered to start editing some of my videos. So it's a never nay sever. It's a never say never kind of deal. But honestly, I don't think I'm very good at it. There are a lot of people who are way better at it than I am. Ikifu would be one you should perhaps take a look at. Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Ghostface, Candyman, Leatherface, Jigsaw, Chucky, or Pinhead. Pinhead. Say that you get YouTube and Patreon revenue equal to or close to a job pay. Would you then get off the working market? Yes. I would love to do this for a living. I would love to do content like this for a living, and make games and make game music and just make music generally, just all this creative stuff. It's never gonna happen, but it's a nice dream. Susie Cooper? What do you think might come next for the Tuesday night streams? Oh, sorry. Please see previous answer. When might we play Jones in the Fast Lane together again, with more people? Hey, let me know. Would you like a highly reflective octuple thick pseudomorph windshield glass? Why, no. I recently found out in one of your videos that you're quite the dedicated horror fan. Me too. Any horror prospects for the channel in the future, be it movies or be it games? What, this face isn't horrific enough? Are you an Indiana Jones fan, Crystal Skull notwithstanding? Also, not just the movies, I'm thinking LucasArts, Last Crusade, Fate of Atlantis. Fate of Atlantis is one of my favorite games of all time. I love the multipathy thing. I think it's an absolutely brilliant game. I love playing it. There's even a Let's Play on the Backseat Designers YouTube channel where we sat for, I think it was 6 hours or something, 4 or 6 hours, with a friend of ours, Samuel Lawson, and we played through the entire game 3 times, all in one go, and had a blast doing it. So I'll leave a link to that in the description, actually, so you can go watch that. Bit of a crap quality because we used Google Hangouts. That's kind of what you did back then. But I love Last Crusade. I've never actually played it all the way through, but it's a good game, particularly when considering how long they had to make it. They had a very, very short time to make it. And yeah, I mean, I've seen the Indiana Jones movies and quite like them. I have a special kind of affinity for the Temple of Doom. Again, I know it's not a good one, but it's sort of the underdog of the series, really, so I kind of gravitate. Also, it's very, very dark when you think about it. That whole thing. What do you think about the Telltale kind of narrative for adventure games? I'm not sure what you mean. The Telltale kind of narrative, episodic? I'm okay with it. I think that's an interesting way of releasing games. Pretty good. QTE sequences can go get fucked. I don't like them. They're terrible. I don't understand why you have to put a timer on dialogue trees. I don't like the whole sort of edge of your seat, I gotta make a decision fast, otherwise I get killed or something awful happens, and then Jeremy will remember this forever. That sort of thing. That kind of sits with me wrong. Adventure games are supposed to be relaxing. For me, not a general thing. They're just for me. For me, adventure games are relaxing. If need be, I can get up in the middle of an adventure game, walk off, get myself a drink, come back, sit down, and nothing will have moved. Well, almost nothing. You know what I'm saying. Right, that was it. Those were all the questions. Thank you to Dan and everyone else who asked a question. Thank you very, very much. Thank you again for getting my channel to 2,400 subs. I hope and pray that you will stick around, even though the output is going to dwindle a bit. Don't worry, the Space Quest videos aren't going anywhere. We're still gonna go through the entire series of fan games now, and it's going to be a blast. And after that, we'll pick up another game series. I do have one in mind. So, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And stop unsubscribing. What the fuck is wrong with you people? I'm kidding. You can do whatever you want. But anyway, do leave me a comment, because I really do truly love the comments. If there's anything you want to follow up, ask, then please do in the comments. I do read every single comment, and I will reply if I feel like it. So, thank you again, and I'll see you around the Chrono stream.